Jonathon here, and welcome to Learn to Playthrough, and welcome to my workstation. Today we're going to be assembling the Custodians of Targa and the Targa Pylons from the enemy pack, Custodians of Targa with Targa Pylons, that I received in the Shadows of Brimstone Kickstarter, Wave 2, Minecart Pledge Level, Round 8. Now during this assembling process, think of it more as assembling tips and tricks than actual assembling. For the assembling, this is geared towards someone who has used an X-Acto knife or a file to clean up their miniatures at least once. So I'll be assembling any miniatures off camera and then returning to discuss the step-by-step of the assembling I just did. This way you'll know what you're about to get into. So with that, just go ahead and sit back, relax, and enjoy. Now before we begin the assembling process, here's a well-known phrase that most of you should know. Look before you leap. Well, in this case, look before you throw anything away. Sometimes items on the sprue don't look like pieces that belong to the miniature, and you won't think twice about looking at them and then just throw them away. As an example, here's the Custodians of Targa. And you got the three main bodies, 1, 2, and 3, so they definitely look like they're part of the miniature that needs to be assembled. These three spheres here though, 1, 2, and 3, they don't have anything on top. Now on the sprue next to the feet of the Custodians of Targa are drops of plastic that look like little spheres. So subconsciously you might think that those larger spheres are part of the sprue, and you'll just end up throwing everything away. So definitely look before you leap, or in this case, look before you throw anything away. Well, that should do it for now. I got plenty more miniatures to assemble, so plenty of tips coming your way. Now as I said, today we're going to be assembling the Custodians of Targa and the Targa Pylons from the enemy pack, Custodians of Targa with Targa Pylons. And here are the Custodians of Targa and the Targa Pylons that we're going to be assembling. First up are the Custodians of Targa. And this sprue contains the 3 Custodians of Targa miniatures, and each miniature comes in 2 parts. We got the 3 main bodies, 1, 2, 3. And then there's also these spheres, 1, 2, and 3. Now, the spheres on this side are blank, but when you flip them over, there's actually a face on them. And they are the heads of the robots, which are placed right here in the middle. The Custodians of Targa are considered freestanding miniatures, so each one does not come with a base. Next, we have the Targa Pylons. Now, the 2 Targa Pylons that come with the enemy pack, they individually come on 2 sprues. And each sprue comes with 3 parts. The Targa Pylons are not considered freestanding miniatures, so each one comes with a 30mm base. Now on the Targa Pylons enemy record sheet, it says that the Targa Pylons are a large size, but they're going to be placed on a 30mm base, not a 40mm base, which normally large enemies are placed upon. The logic I can see why they're doing this, in my experience with the other games, is that enemies that have a big diameter or are really tall are usually placed in the large category. So with all that information about what's included and going to happen, let's get my tools ready, and before we continue on, I'm going to go ahead and jump off camera and assemble the Custodians of Targa and the Targa Pylons. So, I'll be right back. Hello there, welcome back as we just finished up the assembling of the Custodians of Targa and the Targa Pylons. The overall assembling process went by fairly quickly and everything assembled together pretty good. So let's go ahead and talk about how each miniature assembled and any problems assembling them. Now, first up are the Custodians of Targa. And underneath it's got some pretty good detailing. The Custodians of Targa assembled really quick, and overall the assembly was surprisingly easy. As you can see here, I went ahead and started off by examining the front of the sprue and looked for any kind of damages or missing pieces. And I flipped it over to the back side and did the same thing. And once everything was good to go, I went ahead and used my flush cutters to go ahead and remove the miniature from the sprue. And then my X-Acto knife to go ahead and do a scrape back action to remove any kind of unwanted material from the sprue that was on the miniature. Now you might think that you'd want to go ahead and whittle it forward or whittle back with it, but you might catch the plastic and end up going down into the miniature and end up damaging the miniature. Now, as you can see here in the picture, well, in this case, not seeing the picture, is that there are no bases that go with the Custodians of Targa, as the Custodians of Targa are actually a freestanding miniature. So when I was good to go there, I went ahead and did a dry fitting, and I went ahead and took the head of the robot, and I used my fingers to place it onto the body of the robot. But every time that I placed it onto the body of the robot, it would tweak it really bad. And as you can see in the picture, I then decided to go ahead and just use my angled tweezers and go ahead and just grab the head of the robot and place it right onto the body of the robot. And 2 out of 3 times, it lined up perfectly. Now, just one time, it would line up just a little bit off, but just move it a little bit, and it came out pretty good. So then I went ahead and took some super glue and put it inside the body of the robot and grabbed myself a toothpick and just swirled it around a little bit there. Now, inside the body of the robot, at the bottom there's an angled basing all the way around. So by taking the head of the robot and placing it in there, it's going to seat it right in place. So just go ahead and line up the face of the robot facing forward and up a little bit, and it'll look pretty good. And with that, you're going to have yourself a nice, happy little robot. Well, maybe not this one. He looks a little bit kind of angry. But overall, they came out pretty good. There you go. We got the Custodians of Targa. Alright, next up are the Targa Pylons. Targa Pylons assembled pretty quick, and overall the assembly was pretty good. But there was one area that needed to be aware of, and we're going to talk about that here pretty soon. So I went ahead and did the same thing, examined the front of the sprue, and flipped it over to the back side, and examined that. And when I was happy with all that, I went ahead and took the flush cutters and my X-Acto knife to go ahead and remove it from the sprue. And as you can see here, each of the Targa Pylons are going to come with a 30mm base. Then I went ahead and did a dry fitting. I took the top part of the Targa Pylon, placed it between the 2 bottom halves, and squeezed together really tight. Now, it didn't matter how tight I squeezed, that you could still move the top part of the Targa Pylon. Now, this is what you need to be aware of, because when you do glue it, don't think that you can just squeeze the bottom halves together and it'll line up the top part nice and straight. So you're going to have to be aware of that when you glue it together. Now what I did is I took one of the halves of the bottom part, the one that's got the hole in it, and as you can see, the outer edge is kind of flat. and then just on the inside it kind of curves down. Now that's where I put the glue in. So when you take the other half and put it together, that's where it's going to glue, not on the flat part, because if it's on the flat part and you squeeze the pieces together, the glue would squeeze out onto the outer part of the miniature and it would look kind of tacky when you go to paint it. Now one thing to remember is up top here on the bottom part you got that notch. Now make sure you put glue in that section on both halves, because the top part of the Targa Pylon's got that neck that goes in there. That's what's going to secure it in place. So you got the glue in there, you go ahead and squeeze it together, then go ahead and move the top part so it's in line with the body. Then go ahead and turn it 90 degrees angle to go ahead and see that this side is nice and straight. And then just go back and forth to make sure that the whole top and part is lined up nice and straight. Then I'd go ahead and get a piece of sandpaper over there, and then I'd run the bottom of the Targa Pylon on the sandpaper. That way any kind of sprue material on the bottom or any glue that happened to leak out, it'll get scraped off. So it'll have a nice fitting when you do put it onto the 30mm base. So I go ahead and put glue onto the Targa Pylon, place it onto the base and look down to make sure it's centered. But for this one, it got set back a little bit because the base of the Targa Pylon is kind of big for the base itself, the 30mm base. Now I think that definitely there should have been a 40mm base with this, because first of all, in Shadows of Brimstone, a 30mm base depicts a medium-sized enemy, whereas a 40mm base, it depicts a large enemy. So I believe that the Targa Pylons here should have came with a 40mm base. Alright, there you're going to have it. These are the Targa Pylons. And there you have it. That is going to complete the assembly of the Custodians of Targa and the Targa Pylons from the enemy pack. Custodians of Targa with Targa Pylons. The Custodians of Targa and the Targa Pylons. Now that our Custodians of Targa and the Targa Pylons are all assembled and ready to go, let's go ahead and get our enemies back down to the gaming table for some more action.